with the chat. So I'm a little bit all over the place. So I apologize. And if I don't like make direct eye contact as I normally would in person-to-person conversations, that is because I'm, actively monitoring all this other stuff that's happening. But enough about me. So we are, you came in at the right time. We were just talking about Matt Miller, former spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, now coming out and distancing himself and distancing the previous administration in a way from the actions of Israel and openly admitting that maybe undeniably Israel had done war crimes, and that openly admitting that the war crimes were not properly investigated by the Israeli authorities. Have you seen this at all?
No, I didn't.
All right, well, let's watch it once again, I think, then, from the start, because I want to hear your perspective on this, as well as someone who obviously has been closely covering everything that has been going on since October 7th.
In this case, I can't go through all.
Wait, no, this is not what I was looking for. Hold on. Here is the 2-minute video. This is on Sky News, as a matter of fact.
Going on in Gaza now is a genocide?
I don't think it's a genocide, but I think I think
Ridiculous.
It is without a doubt true that Israel has committed war crimes.
You wouldn't have said that at the podium.
Yeah, look, because when you're at the podium, you're not expressing your personal opinion. You're expressing the conclusions of the United States government. The United States government had not concluded that they've committed war crimes, still have not.
First and foremost, that's just following orders, like the Nuremberg defense that failed.
Yeah.
They're saying that, that's the American government's official position, so what can I do? Which is insane. People have gotten far too confident in the international organs of justice not doing the correct thing, especially when the American government is actively defending Israel. And there's some truth to why they feel this way. There's understandable reasons for why they feel this way, but it's crazy to me that he's just openly admitting that.
It's also crazy that he won't admit it's a genocide.
Yeah.
I had to deal with these people as a reporter. I have zero respect for them. We have enough problem in the press at places like the New York Times, where people think journalism is about being a stenographer to people in power, and you can make a very good career of it at places like the New York Times, where I spent 15 years and win lots of prizes. I don't think that's journalism. These people are absolutely amoral. They will get up and cynical, because they will get up and lie, and they'll know they're lying, and the reporters in the room know they're lying. And it's a dirty little game. But I never did that kind of reporting. I was always in the field. I never reported on Washington. I never followed around the Secretary of State or something. I was always in places like Sarajevo or Gaza, which is real reporting. I mean, the essence of reporting for me is holding power accountable. And, these are the classic kind of mandarins of power. It's all about careerism, but they have no moral core, and that he pretty much just exhibited that.
Yeah. He, of course, also denies that it's a genocide. Do you feel like admissions like this, and you've probably also noticed that there is this market shift, this attitude change, maybe a new permission structure that has now taken hold over legacy publishers that have either never really covered what Israel was doing, or when they covered what Israel was doing, they oftentimes contextualized that violence by sometimes directly talking to Israeli envoys in their coverage. Do you feel like there is an attitude shift that you notice as well in Western press? Maybe, I think in the aftermath of this last round of starvation policies that Israel implemented, and all of a sudden you had Western politicians coming out and also starting to criticize Israel for the first time?
Well, it's because of the starvation. I mean, you can, attempt to justify attacks on hospitals and schools by saying they're Hamas command and control centers, or Hamas uses Palestinians as human shields. It's pretty hard to justify starvation. So that's when the shift began. But they're just trying to cover their ass. They're not going to do anything. I think they're just, they recognize now that there's just no way out in terms of defending what Israel is doing. There's no way that they can at this point argue that it isn't genocide. And so they're rhetorically distancing themselves, but still sending the weapons.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an act of very cynical self-preservation.
I agree 100%. Do you feel like that, however, creates a permission structure in Western publishers and Western legacy publishers specifically that then informs people on who the actual victims and who the actual perpetrators are, ultimately creating additional pressure because now more people are informed about the violence beyond social media? Because there has been a generational divide in the way that people have looked at Israel. If you're over the age of 40, you have primarily gotten your news and information from mainstream media for your whole life. You have a lot more trust in mainstream outlets in general than the younger generations do. You don't really rely on TikTok or social media of that sort to get your information about what's going on in Gaza. And that is still heavily, or was heavily slanted, and still is heavily slanted in favor of Israel. Do you feel as though that could lead to even more pressure, more public pressure, more protests in the streets, and maybe even a recognition from the public that the liberal democracy is a lie, that this project is over, it's done, it's in its final stage?
Well, the legacy media, which I come out of, has once again failed to do even basic journalism. I spent time in the encampments at Columbia, Princeton. I have tremendous admiration for these students who, at the risk of their degrees and their status and everything else, stood up to do the right thing, were slammed by the country, by the media, and by their own universities. And what was the narrative that was peddled about these encampments? It was that they were filled with Hamas supporters and anti-Semites. It's just patently untrue.
Yeah.
And it's just, what angered me is that they didn't even bother to go report. I mean, if you watched closely with the New York Times, they'd race up to Columbia and go to the Hillel House and find some Jewish student who felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, what was it, 108 Columbia students were thrown in jail by the cops. So they fed the narrative, and this was from the beginning. So after October 7th, Columbia banned the student chapters of Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. They hadn't even done anything yet.
Yeah.
There were no protests yet.
Yeah.
And so they fed a false narrative. And this is now being used by the Trump administration. They gave credibility to this lie.
Yeah.
And now this lie, which they created, is now including the Democratic Party. Let's not be Schumer was one of the worst. So
3,500 student protesters were jailed under the Biden administration.
Yeah, exactly. So, and they were self-flagellating themselves too. You know, you saw it with Claudia Gay and all these going before the Congress. And I watched it and I thought, you know, they're going to lynch you anyway. It was a complete misreading of power and a complete misreading of motive. Like Trump cares about anti-Semitism. I mean, he's got neo-Nazis, you know, in his cabinet. And so they misread power. They gave credibility to a false narrative. And essentially what they did is hand the bullets to their own executioners. And that's what's happening. So look at Harvard. I mean, Harvard was one of the worst in terms of crushing any kind of dissent on its campus, giving credibility to this idea that, I mean, look, I've taught at Princeton, I taught at Columbia, I taught at NYU, I did my graduate work at Harvard. The idea that these places are bastions of anti-Semitism is just absurd.
It's so absurd. Even Steven Pinker, who I don't think
awful.
I agree with any point on, literally came out in this last round of attacks against Harvard and was like, you guys are being ridiculous.
Yeah, they are.
Like, and it's interesting because like so many of the Harvard graduates then ultimately go and work in Republican administrations.
Yeah,
It's a war criminal factory for the most part.
And, you know, having spent 4 years there, the left is about as welcome at Harvard as Trump. The idea that these are leftist, bastions of, exactly. But I fault the media, I fault the Democratic Party. And you're right that the only people with a conscience came from that kind of generation which has separated itself from the legacy media. Yeah, completely. But the legacy media has just failed us over and over. We go all the way back to the Iraq War, weapons of mass destruction. The fantasy of Russiagate was, for which the Post and the Times won Pulitzer Prizes, even though the Mueller report exposed that all of it was garbage. It's just a complete and utter collapse of any, real pretense of journalism at all. And this is just the latest chapter of that.
Yeah, I think like some of the more recent examples I would say that happened almost in real time that because I remember like covering it was when Cy Hirsch came out with his reporting initially on the Nord Stream pipeline explosion. Yeah. And I could not believe that the immediate notes from mainstream publishers was, oh, maybe Russia did this to itself.
Yeah, right. Which doesn't make any sense.
Which was such an insane thing to say. It defied all reason. It defied all logic. And yet they still attempted to do so. Like they still attempted this narrative. And I could not believe it. It was such an unbelievable narrative.
Let's just on a minute with Cy, because he's a friend of mine. He's our greatest investigative journalist, hands down, Me Lie. He's the one who exposed the images from Abu Ghraib. He's the one who imploded the false narrative about how Osama bin Laden was killed and assassinated.
yeah.
He couldn't publish that in the United States. It got to that point where he had to